You know, it's no secret that the landscape of Star Wars is a tumultuous place right now. We've got more content than ever when it comes to shows, comics, video games, and more. But after a number of projects that have released to mediocre and sometimes downright abysmal audience ratings, many fans are losing hope, claiming the franchise is in the depths of its dark times. In fact, they're starting to call Star Wars dead. But why is Star Wars in such a state? And is there any hope for the galaxy far, far away? Well, let's address the elephant in the room. Star Wars hasn't been quite the same since the acquisition of Lucasfilms by Disney. In 2012, George Lucas sold the company he founded, and with it, the rights to the Star Wars films and any future productions. With the sale came many changes, including the blatant discarding of decades of stories fans grew up loving. The novels and comics in the expanded universe became not canon overnight. This made it so the sequel movies could exist in the place of those pesky Legends plotlines. Major pieces of lore have been rewritten, so that even Wikipedia is not even keeping up anymore. Beloved characters have either been offed for no real reason, brought back for unexplained reasons, or changed beyond recognition. And that brings up an important point. Star Wars, like any good piece of media, is about the story, and we experience that story through its characters. If a character's fundamental personality, motivation, and purpose are changed with no explanation as to why, the audience will become disconnected, because there's simply no continuity. It's not the same character anymore, and therefore the story ceases to continue. But we don't want to dwell on this topic. There are plenty of videos analyzing the shortcomings of Disney's sequel trilogy, and we're not here to do that today. What we actually want to do is shine a light in these dark times for those fans out there who know the heights of what Star Wars has been, and what it totally has the potential to be again. Despite the fumbles in newer Star Wars projects, the true stories of Star Wars have continued. The stories of good triumphing over evil, the stories of never losing hope, the stories of standing up for what's right even if you're standing alone, the stories of trusting in a power you may not fully comprehend. These are just a few of the timeless lessons that fans will keep coming back to relive and relearn. These are the stories that matter, and these are the stories that we know Star Wars is still capable of telling. We know this because we've seen glimpses of great storytelling in a number of new Disney projects. The Mandalorian took everyone by surprise by telling the story of a found family through the lens of a stoic, faceless warrior who learned to protect and trust a seemingly defenseless baby, while that baby wound up looking after him just as much. The show Andor, so far, has told the gritty and hauntingly beautiful tale of a fledgling rebellion against tyranny. Through the lens of a rather aloof, selfish man who began to wake up to the fight he was born into by taking wisdom from leaders who died so that he could live on. The Clone Wars told numerous stories about bravery, loss, and courage by not only the Jedi, but by the massive clone army, many of them who were given names and voices as individual beings, thanks to the show's creators. The Bad Batch was a continuation of that story told through the eyes of misfits who were forced to learn how to live after the war ended. These are not even all the good examples from recent history, but they're the ones we wanted to share to illustrate that Star Wars is not dead. In fact, it's far from it. Although, the now legend storylines were made not canon to the mainline movies, the creative teams at Lucasfilms have still referred to EU content when choosing character names, when choosing formidable antagonists, and when designing arguably some of the most visually interesting and artistic concepts in the franchise's new projects. On top of this, Dave Filoni was recently promoted to the Lucasfilm's Chief Creative Officer. And I have to say this, Filoni is a huge Star Wars fan and worked directly under George Lucas's guidance on the animated Clone Wars show. He, more than most people, understands Lucas's vision and clearly respects the man even though he may no longer be in charge on paper. That's why many fans are excited about Filoni's new role, since it means he'll be brought into the development process of new Star Wars projects far earlier than he was previously. Filoni, hopefully, will be able to echo Lucas's voice when decisions are made, so that the core of Star Wars will remain. In fact, the live-action movie Filoni has been assigned to personally oversee has the working name Heir to the Empire. If you're unfamiliar with that title, it's one of the most successful expanded universe novels ever released. And guess what year it was published? 1991. See how these new projects are starting to draw from the proven success of Star Wars stories that have stood for the test of time. Now, we're not saying Filoni is the savior of Star Wars, far from it. But it's good to know that a fellow fan, someone who cares, is in a position to steer future projects back toward what makes Star Wars worth getting excited for. No, we would argue that what makes Star Wars still alive is you and me. A wise man once said, "These stories persist because we care about them." From video game mods that add new content to our favorite games, to short films, artwork, and fan fiction, it seems like we're constantly sharing our love for Star Wars and adding new dimensions to the galaxy far, far away. The dedication to create and wear cosplay, or to collect memorabilia, shows that we connected with those stories and want to be reminded of how they affected us. We can't let a company kill our love of Star Wars, especially since said company has seemed to be more concerned about shares, stocks, and agendas for the past several years, rather than simply telling a meaningful, uplifting stories. Ideally, if they focus on that, the money would follow, the trust in their brand would follow, the enthusiasm for new projects would follow, instead of being met with dread, or worse, apathy. And the thing is, Lucasfilm has the blueprint for stories that resonate with their audience in the form of Legends content. Similar to how Marvel Studio, which also happens to be owned by Disney now, has nearly a century of comic book runs to adapt and bring to the small or big screen. But get this, multiple recent MCU writers have said that they were warned by the studio against reading the comics relevant to their work. This is mind-boggling to us because the comics are the literal source material, and in some cases, the storyboard for their characters and scenes. Essentially, Marvel's current projects wouldn't exist without the comics. In Star Wars, how can you in good conscience ignore hundreds of examples of compelling character arcs? Or worse, ignore the patterns of success from passionate, vetted writers, artists, and producers that came before you? Now, we understand that Legends can't replace the sequel trilogy or the new Star Wars projects in the canon storyline. But just as Marvel's Captain America Civil War was adapted, not copied, from the comic run of the same name, and how that movie, in turn, laid the groundwork for larger stakes, larger budget, and more financially successful blockbuster movies, the same can be done with Star Wars. It's a good sign that Filoni's working movie title seems to be returning to that of the EU's source material, and that recent shows have reintroduced major characters in the books, namely Grand Admiral Thrawn and Captain Pellaeon. Other important characters from highly successful animated shows like Star Wars Rebels have made their way into live action, which we'll think will pave the way for new Star Wars projects to become interconnected to those legend storylines that have made such an impact on readers decades ago, and to continue to do so to this day. So yes, the future of Star Wars can go many ways, but we think the future is bright. We may be in a slump of mediocre, underwhelming content right now, but the groundwork is being laid for bigger and better things. We have to believe that. And even if the greatest Star Wars stories have already been told, oh man, what amazing stories they were. Those are the stories that will never die. The story of a young farmer boy with his eyes on the horizon who answered the call to do something greater. That same farmer boy, saving the galaxy, not by giving into emotion, but by doing what was right, simply because it was right, and inspiring his father to finally fulfill his role of bringing balance to the Force. Those are the stories that will stay alive inside of us as we continue to watch, read, play, share, and more importantly, live the lessons they taught us. In that way, Star Wars can never truly die.